Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Awesome Albums Extras, where I return to albums I've already talked about with additional information that was either new information that I've learned since then, something I felt I didn't explain well, so I'll explain it again in more detail, or something I simply forgot to mention before. If there are any facts that weren't 100% accurate, I will use these videos to correct myself. And I have all of these in this video, so let's get started. Today, we are returning to the Rolling Stones album, Let It Bleed. Let It Bleed was released during a dark time for the Stones. The past couple years, they were watching their bandmate Brian Jones slowly fall apart from drugs and health problems. He wasn't all that capable of even playing anymore, and that really halted recording and touring. Naturally, they needed some help creating this album, and great American guitarist Cutler was brought in on the Let It Bleed sessions, who later described Brian Jones as a phased-out, sad character who spent most of his time in the corner sleeping or crying. Naturally, since Jones's condition was only getting worse, they started slowly phasing him out of the group. Some ideas for replacements were Eric Clapton, but he was wrapped up in his newly formed supergroup Blind Faith. Ron Wood was another potential candidate after he was let go from the Jeff Beck group, but he wasn't available for very long, soon becoming a member of the Small Faces. Now, to clear up any confusion that this would have caused, yes, Ron Wood does join them eventually in 1975 after the Faces disbanded, a name change the Small Faces had after personnel changes that December. He was officially declared a Stone February of 1976. Singer Mick Jagger calls up John Mayall, singer, guitarist, organist, songwriter, and founder of John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, and asked if he knew anyone who would be a good replacement for Brian, and that is where Mick Taylor comes into the picture. On July 3rd, 1969, Brian Jones was found dead in his pool. Sam Cutler, former tour manager for the Stones and the Grateful Dead, said everything about Jones's death was very suspicious. Less than 24 hours after Jones was found, someone had taken a truck and removed everything valuable from his house, including guitars, clothes, furniture. While this was going on, every scrap that made reference to a financial matter was burned in a bonfire in the garden. The person who removed all this was a close friend of Frank Thorogood, the builder whom many suspect of murdering Brian because he was there at the scene of the crime. Sounds like Thorogood isn't all that good, if you ask me. Thorogood is supposed to have had a deathbed confession to Brian's death, but this was in front of only one witness. And those who both know the witness and know his relationship with the Stones give some doubts. There were actually several people present the night that Jones died, but they were threatened to leave the country, so they had no input to say what actually happened. The medical examiner was unable to establish who was there the night he died. There was an inhaler found beside the pool, so it was believed that Brian had an asthma attack while swimming, which caused the cause of death. Guitarist Keith Richards mentioned in his book, Life, that Brian had bad asthma, and the drugs he was taking at the time aren't exactly the best things for diving underwater. But he also knows that he has strong tolerance for drugs. However, the examiner's report shows that he was suffering from pleurisy, which is an inflammation around the membrane of the lungs, as well as an enlarged heart and a diseased liver. He feels that Brian wouldn't have been so obnoxious to Thorogood and the building crew that they were probably just messing around with him, and he's thinking manslaughter. Despite Jones's death, the Stones still decided to do their free concert at Hyde Park, which had been promised and has been in the papers for quite a while, and they were expecting 500,000 people to be there. And they felt that Jones would have wanted that. They had a picture of him up on stage, and they just felt his presence. It felt that he was there with them. And I also see it as a great way to introduce Mick Taylor into becoming a Rolling Stone. What a long intro, but while the story is sad, it is very interesting. I have never heard this side of the story before. Before jumping into the music, did you know that Let It Bleed had a working title called Hard Knocks and Dirty Socks? They even found some space on the original record sleeve to put it there. Gimme Shelter was written in 1968 while Mick Jagger was filming Performance. The spelling for the name is actually up for debate. The Americans would have spelled it as Gimme Shelter, and the British would have spelled it as Gimme Shelter. most copies would have had this version. There was a neat story when the Stones met up with backup singer Mary Clayton. Jack Nitzsche, American musician, arranger, composer, songwriter, film score composer, and right-hand man to producer Phil Spector, calls up Mary, who's pregnant at the time, as she was about to go to sleep. Her husband Curtis Amy answers. Jack says that she's the only one who can fill this part, so she grabs her coat, and her and Curtis head up there. Her reaction to meeting Mick was, and these were her words, "Man, I thought you was a man, but you nothing but a skinny little boy." She listens to the recording, and they ask if she can put something to it. She has to stop the song, and to tell her what all this stuff meant before she goes any further. They reply, "It's just a shout or shot away," with something in the lyrics. She says, "I'm going to put my vocal on it, and I'm going to leave, because this is a real high part, and I'd be wetting myself if I sing any higher." They did about 3 takes, and no overdub, and they thanked her, and it was nice meeting her. A unique version of the song has Keith Richards singing, however this version does not have Clayton singing, and there's also an early take has Jagger emphasizing war, children, and rape, murder, as well as no vocals by Clayton. I'm really glad they put her vocals in the final product. It definitely adds something to the song. Marianne Faithfula, Jagger's girlfriend at the time, convinced Mick to record a song formerly played by one of his and Richard's blues idols, Robert Johnson. Richard says he got his first exposure to Robert Johnson when Brian Jones played him King of the Delta Blues, and he was just so amazed that there weren't 2 people playing guitar, and says that this guy must have 3 brains to play like that. Now, speaking of Johnson, before I move on, I felt I didn't explain Robert Johnson all that well.
In the late 1960s, Robert Johnson wasn't quite famous just yet, but thanks to the Rolling Stones version of Love in Vain, it certainly got him a little bit more notice.
I almost feel that you guys feel that I don't know who he was. Of course I knew who Robert Johnson is, and I knew who he was then too. He's only a legendary blues musician who sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads and became a legendary blues player. But what I meant in that statement in the original video was that even though he was well known, I feel that he was one of those artists who didn't get fully appreciated until after his passing. And for a group as big as the Stones to cover one of his songs, it's of course guaranteed for people to go back and listen to the original. They settled on Love in Vain. They thought it was a beautiful song, and they were working with Graham Parsons and started searching for other ways to present the song and settled on a more country version of the song. Sam Cutler does the car honk at the beginning of the song. Country Honk is actually an earlier version of Honky Tonk Women, even though Honky Tonk Women came out first. Along with Richard's friendship with Graham Parsons, the song got a lot of influence when Mick and Marianne joined Keith and his girlfriend Anita Pallenberg to Brazil at Christmas in 1968, staying at a cattle ranch. There are also some different versions of the lyrics to Honky Tonk Women. I am strolling on the boulevards of Paris. Instead of the all-American lyrics reflected the nature of the song, which had strong Southern country blues tones, and Mick's slightly slurred delivery accentuate this, and so does Mick Taylor's overdubbed guitar frills. Another alternate version has the woman putting up a fight in New York City, rather than Mick laying with her. One more thing about Honky Tonk Women before I move on to the next song. I had an accidental misspelling of Honky Tonk Women, where I spelled it as Honky Tonk Woman. It's such a small mistake, and I bet you didn't catch it until I pointed it out, but I still wanted to go ahead and correct myself on that spelling. Live With Me was one of the first tracks Mick Taylor performed along with Honky Tonk Women. He didn't appreciate when the session was finished the Stones wanted him to join the band permanently. He felt he was just helping them out on the album and maybe a tour, since Jagger believed Jones would not get an American visa from previous drug arrests. It was originally conceived at the Olympic Sessions in May and completed in Los Angeles in November. As well as electric guitar, Keith feeds the rhythm section with a strong attacking bass guitar, and drummer Charlie Watts provides a powerful backbeat on the simple rock song. In the title track, there is a line Mick sings about a parking lot, which actually weirded me out because he's not talking about a parking lot. He is actually talking about Marianne Faithfula's private parts. Moving on. There was a session in May with Nicky Hopkins, Cutler, Bill Wyman, Charlie Watts, and Mick Jagger. Keith wasn't there because he had a falling out with Rye, but one of the tracks from this session was the Boudar Stomp, written by Nicky, Rye, and Charlie. The song has a riff similar to Rambler. You can hear the full version of the song on the 1972 album called Jamming with Edward.
What's in your eyes? A sort of flashy like April light.
I already mentioned this, but this is the only song where Brian Jones is actually credited for being on. He plays auto harp in the song. Keith Richards wrote the song, and one of his influences was a 1968 Byrds album, Sweetheart of the Rodeo. Keith did the vocals on the whole song. The reason for this was apparently at the point of delivery, an engineer accidentally wiped Jagger's vocals off the multitrack, and Mick was in Australia at the time during July, August, and part of September, recording his film Ned Kelly, so Keith's vocals were used instead. After more research, Keith's bleeding hand story might have actually been You Got the Silver, Not Let It Bleed. But they were doing take after take, trying to get the right drum sound. This part was true. For more information on that, check out the original video, but please wait until this video is done first. Monkey Man originated from some songwriting trips to Positano and Naples, Italy, during March of 1969, as the early instrumental, also known as, indicates. The song pushes tongue-in-cheek stance of satanic messianism to entrap the fans. The song wouldn't be played live until 1994's Voodoo Lounge Tour. Al Kooper came to Mick Jagger telling him if he ever wanted to put horns in the song, call him up, he's got a great part for it. About 9 months later, Mick sends him an 8-track master of the song for him to put the horns in there. Al was very impressed that Mick was able to remember that after all those months. Al wrote a horn part, leaving a spot in the intro where he can play a French horn solo. The intro took about 3 hours to get, and naturally he wanted it to sound as good as it could be, but unfortunately it wasn't as good as he wanted it to be. He sent back the tapes, and a year later the song came out, and they ditched all the horns in there except for the French horn solo. They did give him credit on the single, and that was nice of them. There's a version that was almost a year before the album came out with sparse arrangement recorded. Brian played rhythm while Keith played lead guitar. Little fun fact. Wow, there was a lot more information than I thought there would be, but there was some really cool stuff there. And there were also a couple bits that I had to clarify or correct. If you want more information on the Rolling Stones or Let It Bleed, definitely check out my original video where I talk about the album in a little bit more detail, the album cover, the back cover. So much stuff in that video, and I hope you enjoy it as well as you enjoyed this one. This has been Awesome Andrew, reminding you that the Rolling Stones album, Let It Bleed, is an awesome album. And I will see you guys next time.